The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Let's flash back to a couple of days ago. You sent out this tweet. Something to keep an eye on. Once Nikolai Ehlers makes his free agent decision, there's a sense it could spur trade activity among the teams who fall short in their pursuit of the talented winger. Since that tweet, Nikolai Ehlers has joined the Carolina Hurricanes. So what does that mean for trades, CJ?
Well, what it means is that obviously only one team, the Hurricanes in this case, could get Ehlers. And there are many teams out there that are still looking for, I'd call it sort of top six offensive help in their lineup. And so now the market resets. And you know, we're just come through the July 4th long weekend in the U.S. Not a lot of hockey-related business being done. Probably not a lot of business of any type being done over the weekend south of the border. But certainly as we get into this week, I do think it's something to watch out for. And you know, to me, a team to really keep an eye on is the Pittsburgh Penguins, because they have two such players that fit the bill potentially that I think Pittsburgh would move on from, that being Rickard Rakell and Brian Rust. Brian Rust, as of July 1st, lost some no trade, no move protection in his contract. So he's becomes more movable as an asset. And of course, Rakell was a player the Penguins had discussions on, you know, leading up to the trade deadline, elected to keep him at that time. But, you know, is someone that is known to be available around the league. And so, you know, Pittsburgh, I think, is in a pretty good spot here in the sense that they truly are one of the only teams that I think are not trying to win a Stanley Cup next year, or not trying to take a meaningful jump in the standings. So they have the ability. They don't have a lot of competition, I'd say, in terms of, you know, other teams selling those types of players. And you know, they've established a high price on them. And so, you know, I don't know, you know, who's going to step up and meet that just yet or where that's going to go. But I do think that they're kind of at the nexus now as we're looking to the next things. I mean, there's a few players remaining on the free agent list that don't have contracts. But, you know, I think a lot of teams that are looking for more impactful players still at this stage of the summer are going to focus their attentions on the trade market.
Rickard Rakell at $5 million in a rising cap environment, a guy who's able to hit 30 goals a season. That doesn't sound bad to me if I'm a GM looking for scoring along the wing. I know Brian Rust, obviously, with the experience of the last few years being a part of a whole bunch of cup runs with Sidney Crosby, but Rickard Rakell, for me, I'd love to have that player in my lineup if I could afford it.
For sure, and he's coming off a great season, you know, which is, again, I think bolsters the market for Kyle Dubas as he, you know, takes those kind of phone calls from his colleagues around the league. And, you know, he held firm at the deadline. I mean, there was certainly a lot of teams poking around Rakell, you know, leading up to March 7th. And ultimately Pittsburgh decided not to move on from him. And, you know, the Penguins now have had kind of what I'd call a busy free agent period. They've signed a lot of players to short-term deals, basically taken some bets on guys that, you know, maybe their stock isn't the highest. I think of someone like Anthony Manta, for example, getting a 1-year deal there in Pittsburgh. You know, trying to uncover a few players that are going to be bouncing back this year. And then maybe that's given them an ability to trade off their roster even more and cut deeper, because you're right. Rakell signed for a few more seasons too, which I think would hold appeal to someone giving up a lot for him. You know, Rust is a really interesting player. I mean, he was a big part of those 2016 and 2017 Cup wins. That would be an even more emotional type of trade, I would say, for the Penguins, just because he's been around so long. He's been a line mate quite often of Sidney Crosby's. And, you know, he's been a consistent player. You look at his production, he's giving you 20 plus goals every year after year after year. And, you know, knows what it takes to play a winning brand of hockey. And so, you know, the price on him, I know, is especially high for anyone that wants to get in there. But that we're at that stage of the summer now where if you don't like the composition of your top six and you're around the league, you're looking at the free agent list and respect to those players. I mean, maybe Jack Roslovic could play somewhere in the top six, maybe he's still unsigned. But I mean, there really aren't a lot of obvious solutions on the UFA list at this point in time. And so you've got to look elsewhere. Now there are a few other teams, you know, I've heard, you know, Seattle, you know, might be compelled to move someone like Jared McCann. I mean, there's some other places to knock. I'm not saying it's only Pittsburgh, but because Pittsburgh has the incentive, I think, to keep turning over the roster, and B, has two players that, would generate a fair bit of interest around the league. I do think that they're a strong possibility for where the next move could happen.
Moving on from Pittsburgh, I'd like to at least check in on some other names that have been flown out there. What about Bowen Byram? That's a name we've discussed on this show a few times.
Yeah, interesting spot now because the Sabres have elected for team elected salary arbitration with Bowen Byram, which, means a couple things. First of all, he gets to choose whether it would be a 1 or a 2 year award from the arbitrator, which is interesting in his case because he's 2 years from unrestricted free agency. So, to my knowledge, he hasn't chosen what his award will be, but he has the ability to say, hey, I'll go through arbitration and it's a 2 year award and then I'm a UFA at the end. So it hands him some power. But what it does is it takes away his ability now to sign an offer sheet. And, as it turns out, we still haven't had an offer sheet this summer. I think if you were looking for a place, you might find one. There was definitely some smoke around the possibility of Byram getting one. And so, that possibility is now removed. And further to that, we know the Sabres are willing to move Byram if they can get the right sort of player package back. And they now have until essentially his arbitration hearing to get that piece of business done. And so, the arbitration hearings haven't been scheduled, but they'll be held between July 20th and August 4th. It kind of sets the clock on a decision one way or another. And so, at the end of it, if nothing works out, if you don't get a longer term contract extension with him, done with him, if you don't find a trade, you can just go through the arbitration hearing and you get the award and the player's under contract for at least 1 or 2 more years from that point. But I do think it does focus in on those types of conversations. I mean, in some ways, it's a similar conversation with Nick Robertson, the Maple Leafs forward, who we know asked for a trade last summer, doesn't seem entirely enamored with the spot in Toronto this year. He did the player elected arbitration, but essentially that sets the clock on some kind of decision one way or another, whether he's signing an extension with the Leafs, whether they're moving on from him, for some point at the end of this month or into early August, depending on when his arbitration hearing gets scheduled for. And so, arbitration can be a pretty helpful thing in the process with these players. Before a player has arbitration rights, when he's coming out of just the first 3 years of his deal, that you don't have the ability to have that arb. And so, RFAs quite often sit all summer long without a contract. And then really the pressure point becomes, does a contract happen right before training camp, or does the player miss time? This, at least by having the arbitration period, it does force some decisions here in July. And so those are a couple other areas where I think we could still see some action. At this point in time, I think the Leafs are probably going to hold on to Robertson. We'll have to see. I mean, Toronto's a team out there looking for help, obviously in the top 6, something Brad Treliving discussed after the free agent day on July 1st. And so, I could see them making other moves that have trickle down effects, whether it's someone like Nick Robertson or, Kelly Yarncroke, David Kampf, who both received signing bonus payments in July. And so that they actually have less salary owing than their cap hits for the remainder of their contracts. And so, there's still going to be some business, certainly in July. I think, as we've kind of alluded to on previous shows, probably a little bit more than in the past. But it is amazing how quiet it feels already, man. Like you get so much activity around July 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Ehlers makes that decision. As I mentioned, I do think there will be some trades still, but it's just the league falls pretty quiet pretty quickly. I get it. It's a long year, and obviously people want to take vacations, but also there's not a whole lot to be done in some cases. I mean, some teams probably feel pretty good about their roster right now and are basically, going through development camps and what you do with the younger players, but their attentions are already focused essentially on training camp, and there's a lot of days between then and now, so you might as well enjoy them on the golf course or with family or whatever you want to do.
Absolutely. But by the way, I didn't even formally ask for a Leafs corner. I was going to, but you kind of did that with the way you discussed Nick Robertson and Kelly Yarncroke and David Kampf's possibilities. I'm curious with some of the trade targets you've mentioned a little earlier, if there's a natural fit there. Maybe not necessarily with Pittsburgh as an example. I have another question about Pittsburgh that I'll get to later, but I'm also just wondering, who else in terms of certain other trade targets that could be applicable for Brad Treliving and the Leafs?
I don't think it's a long list right now, honestly. I don't think there's that many players that we term available that can play the kind of role the Leafs are looking for. I sort of wonder if, in the end, this isn't something the Leafs and maybe some other teams actually try to solve this summer, because Toronto doesn't have all that much to trade either, right? That's it. That's the other side of this. I did mention a few sort of bottom six players on their roster that I could see being moved for various reasons, whether it's as an incentive because someone likes them out there, or to clear a little bit more cap space, or even just clear roster space because you can only carry so many players, and there wouldn't be room for everyone. Obviously, some players would be subjected to waivers if you didn't remove while you kept adding bodies into the team. So, maybe this ends up being a longer term project. I mean, it's too soon to say that definitively. It's only July 7th. There's always some things that could pop up that I think nobody sees coming, or we'll see how some of those arbitration cases go and all that happens here. But it might be a long summer in Toronto. I think looking for that option, because the truth is there's not a list of 10 wingers that could fit what the Leafs are looking for that are available. I don't think. And so if they aren't able to, or don't have the desire to get in on, someone like a Brian Rust or a Raquel, maybe a McKenna. I mean, I just don't know what doors you're knocking on at this point in time. I do know the Leafs did have interest in Ehlers and just wasn't a fit from the players' end of that equation. But he was someone certainly I think Toronto had, some interest in as a free agent. But, they weren't alone there, right? Nikolai Ehlers had a lot of options. And, I think it's kind of interesting he's landed in Carolina, where they're desperate, of course, or they've been desperate to just add a little more star power into what's clearly a pretty sound team. They've had a lot of success, but they're looking to take next steps. I'm curious what Ehlers Unleashed looks like in Carolina, because I think he'll get a little more opportunity there than he did in Winnipeg for a variety of reasons. I mean, look, he was always on a team with strong wingers in Winnipeg. You had Kyle Connor there for the last number of seasons. And so Ehlers didn't always get all the power play time you might think someone with his skill set should, or, certainly wasn't always getting the top 5-on-5 minutes. I would think, after signing that $8.5 million a year deal in Carolina, he's going to be a candidate to play more minutes and be even more vital part of the Hurricanes than perhaps he was in Winnipeg. And so I realize I'm dancing all over here, but it's such an interesting offseason because I feel like there's a lot of teams wanting to do things, and there's not a lot to be done, right? Like there's just only so many players. And, it turned out someone like Nikolai Ehlers found himself with all kinds of leverage. And, he took a couple days to make his decision, and really, talk to some of the GMs and coaches involved with the teams that were interested in him, and didn't just have to do, grab the quickest thing off the shelves on, it's like a Boxing Day sale or something. You run in and you just, you're trying to, or a game of musical chairs where the music stops and you're scrambling for your seat. I mean, he was able to actually, take some time to work through things. And, I'm curious to see how things go for him in Carolina, because the Hurricanes, might have made the most substantial moves at this July 1st, I'd argue. I mean, the Condré Miller deal and signing him and then adding Ehlers. I mean, lots of teams added more volume in terms of players, but in a lot of cases, let's face it, they're perhaps less impactful players than what those two acquisitions could be for the Hurricanes. And, we talk about offer sheets. The Hurricanes for sure were willing to offer sheet Condré Miller. In the end, I think the threat of that helped a deal get done. But even if you look at the deal they made, it was a first and a third round pick, along with the prospect, Scott Morrow. Had they offer sheet him at the contract they signed him, it would have been a first, a second, and a third. So I don't think it was a coincidence the way that trade lined up in terms of the return and what, could have been out there, in offer sheet territory. So, some teams are going to have to get creative, I guess, is my takeaway from where we're going this summer. And the Leafs would be, at the top of that list, because they've lost Mitch Marner. They've added some players that they have a good reason to feel good about. But I mean, they're going to need a little more offensive pop. And some of that, I think they can count on coming from Austin Matthews, having, hopefully for his sake, a healthier season. And if that's the case, I would think a more productive season. But, it's not all going to be internal step ups there. So, we'll see where everything lands here. But, I don't think it's going to be like a wild week. We might get a couple trades. That's what I was winking at with that initial tweet. But I think this is going to be a long, drawn out process in places. And I could see Toronto being one of those places.
So in terms of going back to your tweet and going back to teams with who could be making a move or whatever, I have to go back to Calgary and Rasmus Andersson, because I still find it really fascinating, considering the fact that he could be available and there was that window potentially around the draft where they could make a move. Maybe this is another window, but we know the Flames, they seem very content on letting him just play this situation out and him going into training camp being a Flame, as they've done with so many other previous free agents. Guys like Elias Lindholm come to mind, Nikita Zadorov, Chris Tanev. They're willing to do this again. And I'm very curious, obviously, if Rasmus does end up coming up, but it seems like I'm not going to be surprised with him starting training camp in a Flames uniform.
Yeah, which is an interesting call. I mean, look, he has a lot of power in this situation just because he's 1 year out from UFA. And as we saw, for example, with the Noah Dobson trade to Montreal, when a player, you can get more in the return if that player is willing to sign an extension where the trade's happening, right? It's all part of the deal. And in Dobson's case, it ended up being a pure sign and trade. So he even got the ATR as part of that. Andersson, as our colleague Pierre LeBrun reported, at this point in time, only appears that he wants to sign an extension in Vegas if that comes by a trade. Now, that knowledge can maybe snuff out the trade market a little bit from Calgary's end, because you can't take him around to 5 other teams and say, if it's known that he doesn't want to sign with those teams, I think that they're less likely to part with significant assets to get him. So I think that's a dynamic at play. And I know Craig Conroy addressed this in local media, and he said he wasn't aware that it was only one team, but, I don't want to get in the middle of all that. I would just say that, Pierre LeBrun's name stands for itself. I'm sure he didn't pull that idea just out of the clear blue sky. So, that will be an interesting dynamic all around. I mean, Andersson, to me, where you're at, where the Flames are at, they have to get a good return for someone like that. This is a player they drafted and developed. He's been an important part of their team. I think certainly it seems as though everything is on a pretty good level there. Like the relationship, between the player and the team, like they're pulling on the same rope in a sense. But it doesn't mean they want the same things. And so I think it's a critical decision how the Flames manage that. Do the offers truly get better at the deadline, especially if he only wants to go to one place? I think they got to get a handle on that. If he truly is only going to go to Vegas and sign an extension there, I would argue you're probably best just to make the best deal you can. Now, sometimes let time play on and let's see where things wind up. Certainly I still think a team like the Dallas Stars could use an upgrade on their right side. I think Andersson, would make a lot of sense for them if they could make that deal happen. Of course, Dallas is hamstrung a little bit to some degree by the cap, would probably need to be accompanied by other moves to make that work. Although, Andersson's cap hit for next season itself is less than $5 million. So, obviously any extension he signs will be more than that, and he'll be a pricier player starting in 2026. But for the remainder of his contract, that's a cap hit most teams could find a way to put onto their team, especially someone who's going to play in the top 4 of their blue line on the right side. So, he's a great trade asset for Calgary, but how they navigate this, I think, will be fascinating. You're right. I get the same sense you do, Julian, that, it seems as though they're comfortable just to be calm. And look, they've played that in the past, right? From Chris Tanev to Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, like all players. This is a couple seasons ago now, but they brought them into their final year of their contracts, and just, basically at one point it was like Flames board was the trade board. If you remember on the Athletic, it was like the top.
I remember those days.
Jacob Markstrom at the time was on there too. They had a lot of talented players, and quite frankly, all of them ended up being traded. But they happened on a different timeline than, it's not always good to operate at the end of a gun, if you know what I'm saying, like to feel like you have to make a move on July 6th, July 7th, July 8th. The truth is they don't. So we'll have to see how that develops. I don't have a sense that anything's cooking there right now, but there's a ton of time here before training camps get going for, Vegas to circle back and the Flames to see if maybe there's something that could work for them. The other side of it is the Golden Knights have made a series of moves here. They've signed Mitch Marner. They would have to figure out the cap end of it too. And it gets harder and harder the closer you get to the season, because there's just there's less things you can do as that season gets closer.
By the way, we mentioned all of these Flames players who got moved. One guy we did not mention, Noah Hannafin, who was traded to the Vegas Golden Knights And among that return, a first-round pick that the Flames can use in 2026. So it's not like Calgary can't make a trade with Vegas. They've done it before. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Have you ever Googled anything on incognito mode? It's probably not as incognito as you think. Speaking of Google, they recently settled a $5 billion lawsuit after being accused of secretly tracking users in incognito mode. Google's defense was incognito does not mean invisible. In fact, all of your online activity is still 100% visible to a ton of third parties, unless you use ExpressVPN. Everyone needs to use ExpressVPN. You want to know why? Because without it, third parties can still track every website you visit, even in incognito mode. That's your ISP, your mobile network provider, the admin of your Wi-Fi network. ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure encrypted servers so third parties can't see your browsing history. It hides your IP address, it's easy to use, and it works on all devices. Hey, if I ever want to go on incognito mode and Google Chris Johnston with sunglasses on, I don't need third parties looking at what I'm looking at. Anyway, protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/Johnston. That's EXPRESSVPN.com/Johnston. You all know how CJ's last name is spelled. And you can get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/Johnston. Anyway, before I get to ask CJ and some of the weird questions, one other name that I kind of see floating around, like Jordan Kyrou, we kind of brought him up on the last episode. His no move clauses kicked in, but I just, it seems like rumors are still kind of persisting around him. What do you make of that?
Well, look, there was discussions between the Blues and other teams, specifically the Montreal Canadiens. I think they went pretty far down the road of exploring the possibility of a trade on Kyrou. Ultimately they did make the Mayu Bolduc trade. So, they did, those teams found a way to get some business done. It just wasn't that business. The player can obviously be traded once his no move kicks in. I think it adds an element though, and a layer that's harder to maximize the player's value. And so, I understand why the name's been out there, because there were trade discussions and obviously people hear bits and pieces of what was going on. But, I never got the sense that the Blues were like, we have to trade him. I think, one thing that Doug Armstrong does, maybe more than some of his colleagues, other GMs around the league, is he's comfortable like gauging prices. I think he likes to know what the value at any given time of some of his best players are. He's willing to consider those moves even if he doesn't make them. We saw the same thing happen with Braden Shen at the trade deadline, where ultimately the Blues captain wasn't moved, but his name was out there, and for good reason, because there weren't a lot of center options on that market at the deadline, and I think the Blues wanted to gauge that fact. I also think Doug Armstrong's a GM who doesn't mind the fact that might light a little fire under some of his players. Just, it's not obviously the most comfortable thing hearing your name bandied about there. So what do I make of the Jordan Kyrou, rumors? I would make that there were definitely discussions involving him, and they didn't make a trade before his no move clause kicks in. And so now he has huge say in anything that happens. And I think as a result of that, we're actually far less likely to see a trade, but I can't rule it out entirely. We'll see if anything goes there. But I mean, if you're talking about a Kyrou trade at this stage, I mean, that's a talented young player who puts up a lot of points. I mean, we're talking about a blockbuster. And so, I wouldn't rule it out, but I do think the percentage likelihood of it happening went down considerably after we got to July 1st.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if St. Louis would move on from him. Actually, I remembered my Pittsburgh question that I wanted to ask earlier.
Sure.
What do you think of the fact that you mentioned the fact that Pittsburgh seems to be the only team looking to want to rebuild? There's so many other teams that think they're good enough to try to get into the playoffs and make moves. I just find it really weird that this is happening as Gavin McKenna, who is this can't miss prospect, looks like he could be the number 1 overall pick next year. He looks like a talented player you'd want on your team to build around. What do you think of the fact that all these teams seem to not want to tank this year? I'm not crazy in thinking that, right?
You're not crazy in thinking that. And the way I see it playing out, a little bit of crystal balling it here in the summer, is that a couple teams are going to start way worse than they're expecting. And it's going to be mid-November, and they're going to be way out of it, and they might pivot towards the tank. And so I think Gavin McKenna, you're right. In a typical year, a player that enticing being draft eligible. I think we've seen it over the years, like going way back, it was, Buffalo with when McDavid's draft, the McDavid-Eichel draft in 2015. They leaned pretty aggressively into tanking at that period of time to try to get someone like Connor McDavid. Now, I'm not saying Gavin McKenna should be put on the same level in terms of prospect. I don't want to saddle him with that, but obviously he's someone that I think a lot of people are excited about. He's viewed certainly as a player that's going to change an organization. And, normally I think you would have more teams. The problem is we've had the same grouping of teams have been at the bottom of the league for like 3 or 4 years now, right? The Chicagos, the San Jose's, like they've been down there. And so if you're in those places, first of all, you've added talent. Like you've added Celebrini and Will Smith and many other players. You've added Connor Bedard and a whole bunch of guys in Chicago that are coming, Frank Nazar and everyone that they're excited about. So at a certain point, you can't be like, well, we're still intending to be at the bottom of the league. Now, you might still end up there, but I think from an intention standpoint, you can only be down there on purpose for so long. And so all those teams are coming out of it. And then I feel like the next tier of teams, you've got like the Philadelphia's, like teams that didn't truly bottom out, but haven't, been all that competitive the last few years. Like they just don't seem to want to, rip off the next layer and trade more and more impactful players and go right to the bottom. I mean, look at the true rebuild in this league. It's painful. And I think, quite honestly, I'm not sure it fully works too often. I mean, it's worked in isolated cases, but just as often, I feel like you've ended up with, a Buffalo-like situation where they're just perpetually in it. So yeah, we're at this weird stage, but I will say with the McKenna Derby, once it'll come into, focus as he gets playing in the NCAA next year, once the NHL season starts, a few teams are probably going to find themselves in the basement, not on purpose, and then be like, well, since we're down here, maybe we should see if we can make something positive out of this terrible start to the season. So, maybe that bodes well for the in-season trade board. Maybe that means that we'll see a little bit more activity come the year. But certainly right now, I would say Pittsburgh's the only team I would classify as willing to part with useful veteran players to get younger, to whatever you want to call it. Like they're not afraid of the rebuild moniker. I'm not sure. It's funny. Some teams play with the semantics, the terming of that thing. But I mean, Pittsburgh is unquestionably trying to get younger and younger. And that means, they've traded away some veterans, Jake Gensel. And I think others will come here as they keep turning over a leaf. Notably though, we're not talking about their captain.
That's
at least
true.
Not yet. At
That's
least
true.
not yet.
Not yet. No, I don't want to get to that yet. I was wondering about one more team. This is just me wondering before I get to questions, and I promise they'll be fun. If moves could happen, where does Colorado get in on all of this? I think of Nathan MacKinnon just processing an end to a season where he loses in the first round against his buddy Mikko Rantanen, who got flipped twice in season. That's a team that obviously wants to get better. I wonder where they get in on all of this trade activity, if it happens at all, and what names could get thrown around. And people wonder if Marty Necas could be on the end of some trade talks. I wonder what Colorado ends up doing.
Well, I mean, trading out Marty Necas doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you're getting back something impactful, right? And the reason his name is out there to a degree is he's 1 year away from unrestricted free agency. And so you're either got to be extending him at some point, or maybe trading him if you can upgrade him. I mean, a team like Colorado is going to be trying to win next year. I think the one thing that gets missed a little bit about the Avalanche is that, yes, you got Gabriel Landeskog back in the playoffs. They didn't have to account for his cap hit then, right? Like he was entirely on LTIR, and then you get to the playoffs, and not to even get into that whole matter, but just as an understanding, Gabriel Landeskog makes $7 million against the cap. They didn't have to account for that last year. So they had to take a step back naturally to have him as part of their team to start next season. So, right now they looking at Puckpedia, $4 million plus in cap space for the Avalanche. It leaves them some room to operate. It leaves them some room, I think, to get in on a player like Jack Roslovic or someone who's left over, much like I think the Leafs could be knocking on that door as well. Other teams are looking for those kind of upgrades. But then if, depending on where things land with some of those UFAs, I mean, maybe it is the trade. I mean, we've learned in the last year, unquestionably, they're not afraid of the big trade because they made one that they might come to regret it with Mikko Rantanen. Although I would point out, if they were going to play Mikko Rantanen anywhere near the $12 million that he got in Dallas, that would kick in next season. That would complicate things even more with Landeskog, right? I mean, it would take away from other areas of the roster they could improve. So, I see them still being a top team, but they're in a tough spot. Some of their impactful players are getting older, and they're almost cycling where they're at. I think Necas is a huge decision. He's a little younger. He's only 26, and so are they paying him to not hit UFA? Does he want to stay there? I mean, I think that still needs to be worked out. So I think you're rightly targeting them as a team worth keeping an eye on. Anytime you have Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar at the core of your team, plus other, many other good players, there's no reason to think they won't be a strong team again next season. But it feels like there's still some work there's still an incompletion feeling to that roster, right? It feels like they need to, Chris McFarland and Joe Sakic are going to be still busy this offseason and trying to find some upgrades. And Necas is probably the most important decision, figuring out if they can sign him. And if not, how do you deal with that? Do you just walk them to free agency, as some teams have done with good players? The Leafs just did it with Mitch Marner. They ended up getting Nicholas Waugh back in that deal, but ultimately lost a player Marner's caliber for very little. Necas isn't quite on that same level, but I mean, look, he's a very productive player. And if he's not going to sign there this summer, they've got a decision to make on what to do with him.
Absolutely. And with that, let's get to some questions.
Mention.
Oh, go ahead.
Part of why Carolina moved him is I think there was some question about whether they would be able to re-sign him or whether they would want to at the number it was going to take. And so that was part of the reason that Necas was available to begin with and got traded in the original Rantanen deal in January.
Cool. All right. Like the add-on. And it's time for some questions. Let's get to some fun ones, including one question that dominated the call out for questions on X and on Blue Sky. So I picked one that kind of sums them all up. Is CJ's cold Blue Jays heart melting a bit due to their recent play? Will he be going to any games this summer? Top the AL East.
So as of this moment, I have not withered. I have not stepped back from my previous predictions. I have not watched a game. I have not paid the Blue Jays any mind. But I will say the level of hype has gotten to a level that I'm aware now that I'm missing something. That makes sense. Like quite honestly, like in April and May and June, as I was going about my life, obviously traveling, being busy with the Stanley Cup playoffs, I didn't hear anything about the Blue Jays casually, like next to nothing. I didn't know what the record was. Didn't have any sense. But in this last few weeks, it's been impossible to ignore the growing hype around the city in Toronto. And so I'm seeing just on Twitter, just people talking about them never losing again. And, so I'm aware that they are having success and that people are excited. And so this will be the real test of my mettle. Do I stick with it these next few weeks? I'm going on a trip the end of July, but I'm back home for the next few weeks. Got a few work things to do, but not that much. I mean, I certainly have lots of time that I could pay attention. This would be typically where I would get in on the Jays. Do I go to a game? Do I lay down arms and say I'm back? I haven't yet done it, and I'm not committed one way or the other. But
you have FOMO. You have FOMO.
I do not have FOMO.
You don't have FOMO. It seems
no,
like
because if I had FOMO, I would have some point in the last week tuned into a game.
That's fair.
Because I know that they just had a whole bunch of exciting games. But I am thinking like, because I know how much fun it is. I obviously have loved the team for literally my whole life. Maybe this is the time, like I definitely have the ability. I don't even know what the schedule is, but if they play at home somewhere in the next 3 weeks, I'm going to have a few days where I could go down to a game. The weather's nice. Could have a hot dog. This is the time where I might, and if I do call armistice here, if I do say I'm done with this, I will own it. But so far I've not done so.
This is as nice as you've spoken about the Blue Jays in a long time. At least about the experience. At least about the experience.
And honestly, as a fan, like doing this job for so long, this is usually how it goes is I can only, even when I'm not in this sort of declaring that I'm out on the team, like April, May, June, like I kind of keep an eye on it. I'm sort of aware, are they winning? Are they losing? I'm sort of following the storylines from afar, reading Shai Davidi and others. And then it's not really till July that I start going to games and can get into it. And you get the best part of the season, right? You basically get the second half to invest, and I have the time to watch all the games and go down, and then you get into September, and like it's actually a nice pace of life. So the only reason because I've lived it, and like I do know this is the good time. Even if the Jays aren't in first place in the AL East, this is usually when I start getting excited and engaged in the team. So we'll see. I don't know. The question is, do you want to be stubborn just to like honor your word, or do you want to maybe just get in on some enjoyment here? That's the question.
I just want to see you be happy ultimately, CJ. That's all I want.
Well, I am plenty happy, and I'm happy for Jays fans, to be honest. Like I wasn't doing this and then hoping they would go 0-162. Right? Like I wasn't like cheering against the team. I just was saying I wasn't emotionally investing and financially investing in the team. Now we'll question if I can stick to it.
I can't wait to see how this plays out. Also, as we were talking about the Blue Jays, reports surfacing that Cam York has an extension signed in Philadelphia, 5 years with an AAV of $5.15 million. That's what I was guessing you were looking at on your phone. You're trying to break that story yourself. Or maybe not. I don't know.
I was not. But I will say this. Remember, Cam York was a healthy scratch at the end of the John Tortorella era.
Yes, he was.
Obviously a talented young player, though. And, as you can see by that kind of contract, someone that the organization believes in moving forward. So there we go.
Next question from Valkyrie 007. I'd love to hear both your thoughts on the decentralized draft this year. From a viewing perspective, it felt even worse than previous years.
Ooh. Do you want to start?
I'm curious to know about your thoughts, but like I'll just say this. I didn't like it. I didn't like having to, I don't know, just the fact that one, being home and not being there on location for me was already something I didn't like. I love being at the draft. It's a great way to see all your colleagues, connect with people from other outlets, and obviously talk to agents and GMs and what have you, and interact with them and the prospects, of course, and take in all of the energy of being in the building for the draft. I think what the NHL tried to do in terms of enhancing it as a more of a TV product with a decentralized format, it didn't work. I felt there were, at the beginning when Matthew Schaefer got drafted and there were the emotions with him, that was I thought that was its peak moment. That was the high water mark for them in terms of the entertainment value, with everyone getting swept in it. And then after that, there was just this drop. And I'm not even just talking about the technical issues that came up. It's just the reason why drafts like the NFL draft work in the format that they have. The players have to be the personalities and in how they dress and how they act with the commissioner and all of that. It's more engaging. But then when you have these kids who are just super polite and they're just like, hey, thank you so much for drafting me, and that's it. That's not as entertaining. So, yeah, I thought it was, from a viewing perspective, I didn't enjoy it compared to being there in person. And I know you'll have more thoughts on it, maybe more on the fact that GMs probably didn't like the fact that they don't get to run into other GMs, and a lot of deals get done on the draft floor too. Like, I don't know. It was a bit of a dud for me.
The first round was a disaster, unmitigated disaster, way too long, not enough to it. I actually don't think, though, that was because of the decentralized part. I think that they overdid it with the elements that they put into the draft. I think less is more. Quite honestly, I didn't come away from it thinking they can't do a decentralized draft. I just think they can't do a decentralized draft the way they did it. To me, okay, first overall pick, I think we all understand there's going to be maybe a series of interviews and there's a lot that goes on. But as 100%. You go along, and I'm not saying take away from, but like, we don't need 3 interviews for each kid. And we don't need that thing where they're like talking to the front office back home. And because basically all those interactions were the exact same. You know, the GMs or the people from the front office were like, we're excited to get you. And then the draftee is like, I'm excited to play for you. Like, I think they needed to cut that thing in half. I still think they could do it decentralized. I heard from GMs, quite honestly, on both sides. There were definitely GMs who missed the face-to-face interaction, the ability to do trades and everything, like, you know, just the old school way. But there were also a couple GMs that liked being where they were at the home base. They just didn't like the way it ended up being run. So, you know, I do believe, quite honestly, we're going to go back to the traditional format of draft. But I don't think that me saying that the first day of that was an absolute disaster, which it was, I'll stand by that. But I don't think that means that a decentralized draft can't work for the NHL. It's just got to be 2 hours, not 4.5 hours. And we've seen it in the other leagues. Like someone, you can fact check me on this because I didn't watch the NBA draft, but I heard the first round was something like about 2 hours.
It was fast.
I mean, literally, it should be. Here's the thing. I don't want celebrity picks. I don't want introduce this wrestler, and I'm not even like hating on the celebrities. I just think it should be, whether it's Gary Bettman or whomever, one person up there making the selections, you know, come get your jersey, quick interview, off the stage, let's go. And then, you know, I'm with you. Like there could be room for more. I just think we don't need 10 interviews with everybody. Because keep in mind, part of the decentralized draft that's kind of cool, and we saw this happen, like Roger McQueen went down to Anaheim, right? He went to Disneyland. Like the players then go into the markets where they're drafted within either that night or the next day, and they'll get lots of media attention there. I just think we don't need it all on the stage with everybody. Again, much easier for us to sit back and critique this and actually make it. But my one constructive takeaway would be like literally get rid of the production elements. Simpler is better. Tell us a little bit about the prospect. Commissioner makes the pick, or someone like the commissioner designates someone to make the pick, and then just do it quickly. And I think you'll keep people's attention more. Hopefully there'll be trades and things, but you know, a 4.5 hour first round, just, I mean, come on.
Brutal.
It's a Friday night. It was a Friday night, like of the start of summer. Like I didn't see the ratings, but I can tell you without seeing the ratings that nobody watched that. Nobody.
Jeez. Also,
you know,
please.
Seriously.
No, I believe you on that. One other thing I want to add too. The draft clock was the most useless thing the entire weekend. Don't tell me a team has like 2 or 3 minutes to make a pick, and then it gets down to 0, and then we're waiting another 3, 4, 5 minutes until you make the pick. Don't gaslight us into thinking that they had 3 minutes when they actually had 6.
That there was actually a timeline there.
No, that pissed me off to no end. Anyway.
But yeah, I mean, look at it. I hope the kids enjoyed it. You know, they still got to go to LA. Like, I'm sure it's still cool, but you know, I'm actually, because I'm an old guy, and I was like, I didn't mind sleeping in my own bed that weekend because normally it means being somewhere else. But I'm with you. Look, I missed out on some of the glad handing too, but I didn't mind decentralized. I just think they got to speed up the show if they're going to do it that way.
In agreement. Just read this weird question here from I'm not making this up. Their tag is my dog's a criminal. If you were a sandwich, what bread would you be on?
I don't know, multigrain?
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good choice.
Sourdough?
That sourdough's a good choice too. What kind of sandwich would you be?
I love sandwiches. Ham and cheese? I don't know.
Ham and cheese. I'm more of a BLT kind of guy.
Oh yeah?
A club sandwich. BLT or a club sandwich. One of those two.
There you go. I'm probably ham and cheese. Like if I come up to like a nice sandwich counter and there's like 5 options, you know, sometimes like media kind of meals, that's a normal kind of thing. I'm usually opting for the ham and cheese as long as the bread looks good.
What's the best sandwich place in Toronto?
Oh man. I don't even know. Probably my kitchen.
Hey, you know what? That's not bad. That's not bad.
I mean, I'm not eating out sandwiches too often in Toronto, but when I'm home, I love making a good sandwich. I might have a sandwich when we're done recording this. That's how excited I am right now for a sandwich.
Please post the sandwich you eat in the group chat. I want to know. But we need this. Earn Dog wants to know, as it stands now, 12 months out, who would you say are the most likely UFAs to hit the market next summer? The class looks pretty big, but we know some guys will sign.
I don't know. I think because it's impossible to say. I'm most interested, obviously, by what Connor McDavid does. I don't have any sense at all that there's urgency on his end to, sign an extension right now, which I'm not trying to at all sell as he's leaving Edmonton. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think he wants to, take some time here and evaluate his decision. And I wonder, does that leak into next season? Does that leak into the possibility he becomes a free agent? Just because we obviously haven't had that kind of free agent in the NHL. I mean, maybe ever. And quite honestly, the odds are far more likely that he's signing in Edmonton before that. So the odds are likely that we won't have that free agent, but he's the one I'm most curious about. I think Kirill Kaprizov bears watching, but to me, Minnesota has made no secret of the fact that they want to pay him an outrageous amount of money, that they want to lock him up for as long as they can, as soon as they can, which is right now. And so I don't expect him to get all the way around and be a free agent in 2026. But, maybe we'll see a few more players do it. Because it is a rising cap. Maybe it feels like the tectonic plates are shifting under the league a little bit, that some things are changing around the league. And so when you're in a period where things are a little uncertain, it makes sense to wait to get more information, right? And that's why until the day Connor McDavid signs, he's the free agent I'm most curious about for 2026. But we are 359 days from when he can become a free agent. It's a long way to go. 358 from now. So, a lot of ground to cover between then and now. But every day that passes, it gets a little bit, just a degree more interesting there.
I was hoping it would be 359 because this episode is actually the 359th episode we've ever done. It would have been
wow.
Good. Yeah, I know. Remember, we're celebrating 300 episodes. We're almost at 4.
Jeez,
I know.
Nothing stops this train, brother.
Keep going. Last one for you here from JDD. Formula One, the movie, dropping a couple days ago, got me thinking.
I want to see that.
I want to see that too. It looks sick. It looks.
Is it getting good reviews? I'm not even aware. It looked cool when I saw the trailer.
A lot of people love the racing scenes, and a lot of people have been commenting on the score and the soundtrack. Those, and for me, I'm in. I don't care about how formulaic the plot might be. Give me the great racing scenes, and if the Hans Zimmer score is going to be dope with EDM pulsing through my veins, I'm in it. I'm there. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm there.
I'm not in it for a deep plot per se.
No.
It's more just something cool,
Come on, Brad Pitt, Damson Idris, let's just do it. Anyway, Formula One, the movie dropping this past week. Well, it's written this past weekend. It was a few days ago. Got me thinking, if the NHL ever made a movie, who do you reckon should play the lead role, and what would the story arc be?
Oh, man. Lead role. So do we have to go with one of those actors or actresses that are very hockey? You know how the NHL always has the same celebrities at every event? Because, they've identified, no, and I don't blame it. They've identified people who are true fans and they want those people around. It makes sense. Or can we go with any leading actor?
I think whoever you feel would do the best job in that role. I would think it'd be very hockey for an NHL movie to have a relative unknown in a lead role. But I think ultimately for the movie to work, even if you have the unknown in the lead spot, you need someone a name people are going to recognize, even if they're a coach or the kid's dad.
I feel the story arc is you need an older player trying to hang on to something of their career. Mm-hmm. Maybe coming back from injury or...
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could have the hot shot. You kind of go two ways, right? It's the hot shot young person. I'm even thinking way back. For some reason, this movie just jumped in my head as Major League. But remember...
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Maybe Owen Wilson?
Owen Wilson would be a very interesting pick for an NHL.
He's got hockey hair. It's kind of where my brain started on him. He's already got the hockey hair kind of locked in, I
could see that. If he was all right, I want to give it one more go. Let me get back to the league. I'm climbing from the ECHL to the AHL, and I finally get that cup of coffee in the NHL. Yeah. I don't think that'd be bad.
What's your favorite kind of sports narrative? Do you like it when it's like the young guy coming in and like changing things, or do you like it when it's like the old guy looking for one more moment of glory?
I kind of like the young guy who changes things, who's very different from everyone else. I don't know. Maybe it's because I maybe see myself more in that type of character versus the older guy. But like, yeah, if I were to do it, I'd be like, all right, you get the kid who is different from everybody. And I think for the NHL, it would actually work a lot where, or maybe some people might not like it, but like you get someone who is very different from everyone else and they kind of stand out for being different. I don't know. It would be very weird, but I'd like that plot line.
Yeah. I mean, there hasn't been a good hockey movie for so long. It's kind of crazy.
Trying to think, what's the best hockey movie Goon, when they did The Rocket a couple years ago?
Yeah, but I mean, Mighty Ducks was probably the high. Like that was like that. Those movies had like wide acclaim, right? Like people that aren't into hockey love those movies.
Yes,
like I can't think of the last time that hockey had a movie, like a commercial movie, where like even non-hockey fans got into it. Like it might literally be Mighty Ducks, which is when I was a kid. So it's been a long freaking time.
I watched the Mighty Ducks the other day. I just wanted to watch it. You know what?
Does it hold up?
I think it kind of does. There's a couple moments where I'm kind of like, I don't know if it holds up that well. I kind of quibbled over. I don't know if I want to start getting into me misremembering movie plots, but like there are a couple elements of the plot I quibbled over. And I will say this though.
Most movies that are 30 plus years old will not hold up. But no. You know what I mean? Like over time, taste change, jokes change, just like the technology of how they make the movies changes, which, you know, it feels dated and old. Like it's hard to make an older movie that stands the test of time, I think.
Absolutely. And to say this, it's not because of like the jokes are like too like bad or anything. You don't need like a disclaimer saying like, oh, you know.
No, I don't mean even mean that. It's just
no.
But it's just sometimes like, I don't know. I remember seeing Ernest Goes to Camp. I used to love that movie when I was a kid. And then I saw it once when I was like 20 and I was like, how did I even watch this? It's so cringe. That's not a good example because that's a little kid's movie that I saw when I was older and I was like, oh man, that's bad.
Or like I watched Rush Hour the other day and I was like, oh yeah, some of these jokes do not hold up. They do not hold up. Like I can imagine in the 90s, it's like, yo, this is hilarious. And it's still hilarious now, but it's like, oh yeah, right. There's some jokes that don't work. It is what it is.
You know what movie I loved as a kid that was a sports movie is Tin Cup. But I would love to know if that movie held up because that was a pretty darn good movie at the time.
What's Tin Cup?
Oh, wow.
I never
the golf
watched
movie.
Okay.
Kevin Costner. But it's good.
Rene Russo.
It's good. It's a good movie. Well, sorry. It was good in like 1996 when it came out or 97 or whatever year it was. But
96.
But I don't know if almost 30 years later, I'm not sure if I'd still watch it and enjoy it or not. But that might be a summer project. I'll go rewatch Tin Cup and see if it's stood the test of time.
Last one and then we'll wrap up. Are you going to watch Happy Gilmore 2 when it comes out?
100%. Are you kidding? Yeah. I am all in on that. I mean, it looks like all sorts of modern golfers have been part of it, even just bit parts. And I loved the original when it came out too. I mean, that had a little hockey in it, right? Adam Sandler had like a little brief bit of hockey in there. So even if it's just goofy and whatever, just 2 hours of nonsense, I'm in for that.
I'm in for that too. I love the original. Adam Sandler, one of the celebrity draft pickers from the draft we were just bashing a couple minutes ago.
Right. He made the James Hagan selection.
He did. I liked his cameo, but yeah, maybe too many celebrities for that draft process. All right, we've done enough damage for a Monday. I think we've done enough.
Yeah. It's July, buddy. It's all about nonsense. So embrace the nonsense.
Yes, absolutely, we will. One more episode before we wrap up season 4 of the Chris Johnston Show. Great work as always. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave a nice rating if you can. And we'll talk to you all later this week.
You want to know something weird I didn't even share?
Tell me.
I just spent the weekend in Halifax, and I'm not exaggerating. I've never been recognized more in my entire life than 3 days in Halifax.
Oh,
I'm not kidding.
Oh my God. Tell me about that. This is like an epilogue for the episode.
there's not much to share other than like I was getting stopped everywhere and people were saying
No
hi,
way.
and photos, the whole bit. I don't know if we're big in Halifax or what it is. Maybe I was hanging out in touristy areas on the waterfront there, so maybe I have no idea why, but I don't know if Halifax has one big group chat and like the word got out I was there. I'm not sure what was going on, but
is there a live show potential in Halifax?
I think there definitely could be based on one weekend in July. There was definitely the possibility that there's at least awareness that I exist out there.
Right in the
comments.
I'm
sure you too.
Write in the comments if you want us to come out to Halifax for a live show. I'd be down.
I will tell you this:
I'm looking for an excuse to go to Halifax.
I was going to say there's a high potential for fun if we go to Halifax because it's just a great restaurant and bar city, among other things. But it's really is elite. I ate my way through Halifax the last few days because there's so many great restaurants. Anyway, just sharing that.
What's the best? Okay, no, but you can't bring this up just as we're about to end. I have so many other questions. So many questions.
Well, I would say I went for pizza at Lou Pécu. I think they recently got recognized as one of the top 100 pizza places in the world. That's how I heard about it. And it was elite, like an amazing pizza. But there was all kinds of stuff. I mean, obviously, when you think of Halifax, I mean, you can't go wrong with the various number of seafood restaurants and that's where the elite food is. But I'll tell you that pizza restaurant, Lou Pécu, highly recommend from CJ. I love myself a good za.
100%. Adding that to the list. Thanks so much for listening, everybody.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.